do the attendance check-in. Okay, town meeting members, if you haven't checked in yet, now's your last chance to do so. We're going to start the meeting in a couple minutes. Looks like everybody's checked in who needs, and the IT guys have got everybody in, I believe.
Mr. Moderator, we have no queue. We have no queue.
Okay.
And good to go.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm going to call the meeting to order. It's May 10th, 2021, the annual town meeting. We're on our fifth night. And can we have the town meeting members do whatever you do, stand up or put your hand in your heart. We're going to play the Star Spangled Banner. Thank you, Ryoko. Did we close the attendance check-in vote? You'll notice this screen cycles through a little bit faster. Whoop. We had the Mr. Pato speed up the screens for the attendance check-in, not the attendance check-in, the review of the voting. So try and remember where you are, because we're only going to show each screen for 4 seconds. We had been showing it for 8, so we're hoping to cut out a few seconds of time on each screen, about 4. So it's a couple seconds here and there. It's just that we don't need as much time to look at these as we did before, because they're available over on the portal page all the time for everybody. So we're going to try 4 seconds tonight. We're going to see how that goes, and we may actually drop it down further if we find that works well. Okay, so I have very few remarks tonight. The only remark I have is that our unnamed phantom emailer, who holds himself or herself out as affordable housing, Arlington Affordable Housing at Gmail, has sent out another email that doesn't deserve any of us to have spent time reading it. What I might want to suggest is you all just, if you got that email, just block that person, because they're not going to give you any information that's worth reading, and they're refusing to identify themselves. So all they're going to do is continue on their lowly ways. So just block that person's email so you don't get that junk anymore. They actually told the people this time to not even send it to me, because they knew I would speak out against it. So thank for the plethora of town meeting members who did send it in. There's quite a few of them sent it to me to bring it to my attention. Okay, so that's the end of my remarks. Mr. DeCourcy?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. It is moved that if all the business of the meeting as set forth in the warrant for the annual town meeting is not disposed of at this session, when the meeting adjourns, it adjourns to Wednesday, May 12th, 2021 at 8 p.m.
Second.
All in favor? Can we open the raise hands? Anybody objects? Use the raise hand feature. Otherwise, we're going to be back here on Wednesday, the 12th. Seeing up, we have one person objecting, but otherwise, I'm going to consider that a vote of 200 to 1, so it's going to pass. So we can put raise hand down. Thank you. I believe somebody, announcements or resolutions. Anyone have an announcement or resolutions? I believe one person did. Alexander Bagnell did. Alexander, let's bring Alexander Bagnell up.
Alex Bagnell, Precinct 7. Arlington's Commission for Arts and Culture is celebrating spring in Arlington Heights with Neighborhood Haiku, a public art project bringing original poetry to storefront windows. The whole community is invited to take up a pen and write a 3-line poem inspired by the distinctive character and neighborhood life of the Heights. Neighborhood Haiku is part of an Arts Commission initiative to spark economic vitality through the arts, creating opportunities for local artists, beautifying our business districts, and supporting a thriving Main Street. 30 haiku will be selected to be hand-painted in storefront windows in the Heights. All haikus will be published in artsarlington.org, and all authors will be invited to read at a June celebration. You can join one of 3 free haiku Zoom workshops with local poet Jesse Brown this week and next, or write on your own. The deadline for submissions is May 31st. You can find all the details on the web at artsarlington.org/haiku. And now I understand there may be a town meeting member in this meeting with a haiku ready to go. And with a permission for the moderator, I'd like to invite them to share. Thank you,
And who
Mr.
would that be?
Moderator. Well, I don't know if I want to speak for him.
Well, we have to bring him up.
Mr. Len Diggins.
Okay, Mr. Diggins.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Len Diggins, Precinct 3, and here is my haiku to town meeting. Hear ye, town meeting, the deliberation in the spring. When will it end? Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, Mr. Diggins. Very nice. Any other announcements or resolutions? Seeing none. Does anyone have any reports of committees? If so, use the raise hand feature to get our attention. Okay, I don't see any reports of committees, so we can put the raise hand feature down now, Ms. Sullivan. Mr. Fossett?
Mr. Moderator. Sorry, we do have one raised hand in the queue.
Oh, I didn't see it. Okay, so who's that? Oh, Mr. Yantar. Okay. Hold on, Mr. Fossett. Let's bring Timur up.
Mr. Moderator, I move that Article 3 be removed from the table.
Thank you.
Second.
Second. If you object to Article 3 being removed from the table, please use the raise hand feature. Article 3 is on the table. Mr. Yantar.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Timur Yantar, Precinct 7 and Chair, Capital Planning Committee. I move that the update, the Capital Planning Committee's report to town meeting, be accepted.
Second.
Second.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Yantar. We have an updated report of the Capital Planning Committee. It was circulated to everybody last Friday, I believe. It's been seconded. If you object, please use the raise hand feature. Seeing none, it's unanimous vote. The report is received. Any other reports of committees?
Mr. Moderator, I move that Article 3 be laid upon the table.
Second.
Thank you, sir. Second. It's been seconded. Article 3, the motion to put it on the table. All in favor? All opposed, please use the raise hand feature. Seeing none, it's a unanimous vote. Article 3 is on the table. And that brings us to technically to Article 35, but Mr. Fossett.
Mr. Moderator, Charles Fossett, Precinct 8. I move that Articles 35 through 54 be laid upon the table.
Second.
Okay, as we discussed the other night, we're going to do budgets tonight. So we're tabling all articles between 35 and 54. And I have a second. Anyone object, please use the raise hand feature in Zoom. Seeing none, it's unanimous vote. All those articles are upon the table, and that brings us to Article 55, Town Budgets. Mr. Fossett?
Yes, Mr. Moderator. I have already presented the Finance Committee's report to town meeting, and there's on the first night of town meeting. And there's also a detailed report contained in the material that has been provided to all the town meeting members. So at this point, I think it's appropriate that we start with the first budget, Finance Committee.
Okay, I'm going to take 1 second. Mr. John Ellis has an amendment. We'll give Mr. Ellis the ability to introduce his amendment, and then we'll start with the Finance Committee votes. Mr. Ellis? John
Thank
Ellis.
you. How's my sound?
Very good.
Great. May I have a second to my amendment?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'm a member of the Town Finance Committee, and one of our responsibilities is to review the budgets of every town department. During our review of the police department budget this winter, we learned about a new expense for $43,000. The purpose of these funds is to cover the storage of videos to be collected by police body cameras. The $43,000 does not include the cost of those cameras themselves. This amount is approximately $113,000, which will be paid for from an asset forfeiture fund controlled by the police department. Nor does that $43,000 include a yet to be determined amount the police union will request to wear body cameras. In the town of Concord, that amount was $1,000 stipend per officer and additional paid time off. In other communities, the amount has been more. My amendment would remove the $43,000 from the budget for this fiscal year. And the reason is because the police department and the town have not yet published the policies and procedures that will surround body cameras. While on the surface, a police body camera would seem to inherently bring transparency to policing, the reality is different. A camera is just a thing, it's an object, and whether or not it delivers benefits depends entirely upon how it's used. And as many other communities have discovered across the country, the policies and procedures of the cameras are as important as the use of cameras themselves. Depending on the policies and procedures of a given town, the fact that an officer is wearing a body camera may or may not mean that that body camera is on. In some communities, officers have the authority to turn off the camera. And even when the policy states that an officer should not turn off the camera, when the repercussions for not following the rules are low, the camera may be off. That happened 2 weeks ago in Virginia Beach. A man named Donovan Lynch was shot by police and killed, but the officer's body camera was off for unknown reasons. Second, depending on a community's policies and procedures, the fact that the body camera was on may or may not mean that the video will be released publicly. Many police departments have discretion to determine whether those videos will be released, whether or not it's in the public interest, whether or not the officer fired their service weapon. Third, just because we have a body camera doesn't mean that the police will handle the content with care. In Colorado, the week before last, a woman, 75 years old, dealing with dementia. Yes.
But we're not discussing police body cameras. Your amendment says remove $43,000 from the budget. I understand your point, but we don't need the summation of what's going on in the rest of the U.S. Please tell us how this is going to affect us in Arlington specifically, and keep it within the scope of that.
Mr. Moderator, I'm trying to give a little background about...
I know. We all know. We're all smart people. We understand what's gone on in the last year with police and body cameras. So please,
okay.
When we get to the police budget, police budget, if you want to get more into detail, I'm just giving you the ability to enter your article right now. So please keep it within the scope of your amendment.
Okay, so the amendment would remove the $43,000. And I was just going to say, Mr. Moderator, that despite the fact that these unfortunate outcomes of body cameras in other parts of the city. I don't want to paint our police department with that same broad brush because I have high admiration for the chief and our department. But what I do want to say is that we as citizens and we as members of town meeting consent to the laws and rules and regulations of our community. We may trust the planning department, but we still vote on the height of the buildings. And we may trust the CPA committee, but we still vote to approve their funding. And when you have an issue as complicated, as difficult, as tricky, and as complex as the recording of residents in their homes in moments of stress, trauma, domestic violence, in various states of dress or undress, I believe that town meeting has a responsibility and an obligation to make sure that the rules and regulations are fit for Arlington and that the body cameras that we will be spending money on meet the needs of our community. And I am hopeful that the police department will be able to come back in a future year when the policies and procedures have been developed and ask for this money again. So my amendment would remove the amount of money, $43,000 for body cameras, until we learn what those policies are and we learn what the true cost of the program will be. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I yield my time.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay, so we're not ready to so we have Mr. Ellis's motion. It's on the table. I'm not going to take anybody on the waiting to speak list because they don't know what you're speaking about yet. So if those two folks will put their hands down for the moment. The way we're going to handle it, in the past, what we've done is I've read through each of the budgets one by one serially. And if someone wanted to hold one of the budgets, they would yell hold, and then we would continue on. I've thought about this, and in order to, I think, save a little bit of time and complexity, how we're going to handle it this year is we'll start with the first budget. When I get to it, hold on. And I'm going to go to each one of the various budgets. So we'll start with the Finance Committee budget. I'll open that up. If anyone wishes to discuss the Finance Committee budget, they'll put a request to speak. We'll wait for a minute. If no one wants to use the Finance Committee budget, we're going to close that budget and then move on to the next Select Board, Town Manager, Human Resources. When we're done going over the budget, we're going to move on to the next one, and we're not going to go back to it. Just like we would if we had the budget held, we finish it, and we go on to the next one. If there are 18 people on who want to speak about, say, the town manager budget, you are free. Someone is free to make a motion to terminate debate on that specific budget only, not the entire Article 55. I want to get through all of the articles before we terminate debate on the entire article. So we're going to go through all the budgets. We're going to go through the reserve funds, the et cetera, the enterprise funds, all of those. Then we'll stop and take a vote on the entire Article 55 budget. So we're going to just, instead of going through it once, then going back, we're just going to go through it. And Ms. Friedman has a point of order. We're going to go through it and one budget at a time, just like we would normally in the hall. We're just going to eliminate that step of hold just for this year. Let's hear Ms. Friedman's point of order.
Good evening, Mr. Moderator. My name is Beth Ann Friedman, Precinct 15. And I raise a point of order because we skipped over Article 53 that I put a hold on.
Yeah, we tabled it. We tabled every article between 35 through 54, which means they're all put on the table. And when we're done with the budgets and the other finance articles, we're then going to take everything off the table and go back to Article 35, and we will get to Article 53. That's what tabling means.
If I may, Mr. Moderator.
Yeah.
Article 53 adds 2 positions, which are going to appear in the budget we're now discussing.
Well, you can bring it up during that budget item. If it's an item for the comptroller's office and we're adding a position, you're free to discuss that then.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Moderator.
Thank you, Ms. Friedman. Mr. Ellis, what's your point of order?
Mr. Moderator, I apologize if I jumped the gun on my presentation there. Could you just clarify when we get to the police budget what action I should take since my comments were related to that?
Sure. You just put the request to speak on.
Okay, great.
You put a request to speak when I get to the police budget, which is number 619.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So if we're ready to go, I'll start reading the budgets off. If somebody wants to speak on the budget that I've read, please use the request to speak button. And I'll give everyone a second or two to actually do that. I won't move at a rapid pace. So the first budget is the Finance Committee. Anyone wish to speak to the Finance Committee? Seeing none, Finance Committee budget is completed. The next is the Select Board. Anyone wishes to speak to the Select Board budget? Now's your chance. Seeing none, Select Board budget is completed. Next, we have the Town Manager budget. Anyone wish to address the Town Manager budget? Okay, Ms. Bloom. So we'll bring up Nancy Bloom first.
Nancy Bloom, Precinct 18. I just have a small question on the town manager budget.
Sure.
Just wondering why the personnel prices are very similar. The expenses went up by over 15%. I know it's just $8,000. I was just curious what it was.
Mr. Chapdelaine.
Mr. Moderator, Adam Chapdelaine, Town Manager. Those expenses, Ms. Bloom, are tied directly to increases in both the cost of our annual maintenance contract for the town website, as well as some of the ancillary web services that we offer as part of our website.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, Pam. Okay. Miss Zarina put her hand down. Okay, anyone else wish to speak to the Town Manager budget? Seeing none, the Town Manager budget's completed. 4, Human Resources. We have anyone for Human Resources? Nope, seeing none. That'll be completed. Information Technologies, budget number 5. Anyone wish to speak to the IT budget? Completed. Article 6, Comptroller. Budget number 6, the Comptroller. Okay, Comptroller is completed. 7, Treasurer Collector. Do we have any questions for the Treasurer Collector? Seeing none. Postage, budget number 8. None. Board of Assessors, budget number 9. Okay, Board of Assessors is closed. Completed. Legal Department, number 10. Okay, Nancy Bloom wishes to speak to legal.
Nancy Bloom, Precinct 18. I had a small question. I know that that Mr. Heim is the town council and Mr. Callahan, as I understand, is deputy town council, but I don't see a listing. Is the deputy town council not listed under legal services, or are they combined?
Mr. Heim, how do you have your employees listed?
Mr. Moderator, this is Adam Chaplin. I could probably answer that. That's okay.
Fine with me.
So Adam Chaplin, town manager. So what you see listed there, well, I'll start by saying the workers' compensation benefits attorney position you see listed has been changed to the deputy town council position. The position still fulfills the duties of the workers' benefit attorney, but has also been assigned broader responsibilities in terms of the town's legal services. So we've changed the title to deputy town council. However, the formal representation of that change will actually take effect when Article 53 that Ms. Friedman had mentioned earlier is voted on. And once that article is voted on, the position will officially have that changed title and then be incorporated into town budgetary documents.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, Ms. Bloom. And I want to just note that right now I'm looking at page B4 of the Finance Committee book, the bright yellow book. Doesn't show up well. High visibility yellow book, page B4, and we just finished number 10. So you should have your FinCom book out now, and we're on page B4. The next budget item is 11, town clerk. Seeing none. Number 11 is completed. 12, Board of Registrars. Board of Registrars. Budget 12. Okay, Betty Stone.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Betty Stone, Precinct 7. I'm curious to know if this is the section of the budget where poll workers are paid from. Is that correct?
I don't know.
Because I'm looking.
Yeah.
Mr. Moderator, this is Adam Chaplin. I can answer that question.
Yes, Mr. Chaplin.
Adam Chaplin, town manager. No election, the cost of operating elections in town, including paying poll workers, is part of the select board budget, not this budget.
Okay. Thank you. Then probably what I'm looking for is there. It just looked extremely tiny and low. If even though we had a bizarre year of working polls, but thank you very much, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, ma'am. Anyone else wish to discuss Board of Registrars? Seeing none, we'll complete that budget. And we're going to go to page B5, parking, budget 13. Anyone wish to address parking? Seeing none, that's completed. 14, 14, planning and community development. Anyone wish to discuss the planning department and community development? Mr. Revelak.
Hello, Mr. Moderator. Steve Revelak, Precinct 1. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Very good. I was wondering if the planning department feels that they have sufficient resources to carry out priority issues for the town, such as finding ways to encourage new growth and an expansion of the tax base. This question is sort of motivated by Mr. Fossett's remarks during the State of the Town address.
So can you repeat that for me again?
Sure.
So I'm wondering, figure out who to give it to.
I'd like to know if the planning department has sufficient resources to to work on ways of finding, encouraging new growth and increasing tax revenue.
Okay, Miss Raitt.
Jennifer Raitt, Director of Planning and Community Development. Yes, I do believe we have the necessary resources and expertise in order to do the things that are mentioned by the speaker. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Does that answer your question, Mr. Revelak?
That it does. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else wish to speak to planning and community development? Seeing none, it's completed. 15, Redevelopment Board. No one wishes to speak to the Redevelopment Board budget. That's closed. Closes that budget. That's completed. Zoning Board of Appeals. Budget 16, Zoning Board of Appeals. Seeing none, we'll complete that budget. 17, Public Works. Does anyone wish to discuss the Public Works budget and all of the sub portions of it? Okay, Miss Broder, Leah Broder.
Good evening. This is Leah Broder, Precinct 1. I have a question about under administration, school sustainability coordinator, which we had in 2021, and there's no item there for 22. So has that position been eliminated? And if so, can whoever is in charge speak about it, please? Thank you.
Mr. Rademacher?
Yes, Mike Rademacher, Director of Public Works. The position has not been eliminated. It is fully funded under the school's budget this year.
Oh. Okay. Does that answer your question, Ms. Broder?
It does indeed. Thank you.
Thank you. Kevin Koch?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Kevin Koch, Precinct 16. In the spirit of institutional memory, I'm wondering how much salt was used on the roads last year.
Mr. Rademacher, Mr. Koch is asking Mr. Tremblay's question.
Am I still unmuted? Yes.
Yes, sir.
Sure. Mike Rademacher, Director of Public Works. This year, we used approximately 6,600 ton of salt.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Dre?
Good evening, Mr. Moderator. Elizabeth Ray, Precinct 8. I was wondering if somebody could speak just briefly to the new position of waste diversion and curbside enforcement. Thank you.
Mr. Rademacher?
Yes, Mike Rademacher, Director of Public Works. This is a position to help with the enforcement of current waste regulations and policy the town has established. It will also help to formulate our next waste contract by looking at patterns and trends in the waste being put out in the curb.
And may I ask a follow-up question?
Sure, you still have the floor.
Thank you. So is the funds for this position, is the idea that the cost savings by recycling correctly will lower the cost that we pay someone for our recycling, and this position will pay for itself, or is that sort of irrelevant?
It won't necessarily pay for, is Mike Rademacher, Director of Public Works. It may not necessarily pay for itself, but it will help us guide our next waste contract, which will help us to get the most cost-effective contract in the next year or two.
And when is that contract up for renegotiation?
A year from now.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Trey. Anything further? No. Okay, Ms. Malofchek.
Beth Malofchek, Precinct 9. I'm curious, I'm hoping this is the appropriate time to ask this question. The $90,000 that was surplus in the last fiscal year, where did that go? I'm unfamiliar with the protocol. Thank you.
Mr. Fossett.
Generally, Mr. Charles Fossett, Chairman of the Finance Committee. Generally, surplus funds get returned to free cash at the end of the year. And then they become a source of revenue in future years after the free cash is certified.
Thank you. Beth Malofchek. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else on Public Works budget? All the Public Works budget. Anyone else wish to speak to them? Seeing none, we'll complete the Public Works budget. The next budget is page B9, 18, facilities. Anyone wish to speak to the facilities budget? Seeing none, we'll complete facilities. Next, we have police services, 19 on page B9. Mr. Christiana.
Greg Christiana, Precinct 15. Mr. Moderator, would it be possible for you to determine maybe through the police chief what the status is of policies on body cams, and also if Mr. Ellis's amendment were to be approved tonight, would the chief potentially have anything to say about how that would impact services? Would that be applied to body cams, or might it actually affect other budgetary items?
Well, yes, I will put that to the chief, but just so town meeting's clear, we don't have a line item veto. We will just remove $35,000 from the $43,000 from the entire police budget, and then it would be up to the chief how she wishes to delete that from her entire budget. So Chief Flaherty, can you answer Mr. Christiana's question regarding body cams and their policies that you may or may not have written already?
Good evening, everyone. Julie Flaherty, Chief of Police. I'll start by saying that in early June, after the murder of George Floyd, I heard from many community members who had some concerns about the Arlington Police Department's transparency and accountability, and they called upon me to deploy body-worn cameras for our police officers. I believe that a police department that deploys body-worn cameras is making a statement that it believes that the actions of their officers are public record, just like any police report that our officers write would be public record. Over the past several months, I've been researching best practices for policy in accordance with the Massachusetts Police Accreditation Commission, where we're accredited, the Massachusetts General Laws, the Secretary of the Commonwealth, and we're still in the process of deploying a draft policy, and that draft policy will be presented to the Select Board when it's complete once the finances are approved. I think it's also very relevant to note that with the passing of the Massachusetts Police Reform Bill, it calls for actually 18 new commissions, but one of those commissions is a task force on body-worn cameras. And that task force will propose regulations for establishing a uniform policy for all cities and towns in Massachusetts. They'll be tasked with providing minimum requirements for storage, transfer of audio and video recording, and it'll answer many of the questions that Mr. Ellis has. They will be conducting at least 5 public hearings throughout the Commonwealth. There'll be 25 members, including the Secretary of Public Safety, the Secretary of Technology Services, district court judges, members of the Black and Latino Legislative Caucus, members of the Mass Minority Law Enforcement Offices, a district attorney, members of ACLU, and other members that will be appointed by the governor. And by July of 2022, they'll present standards for buying body-worn cameras for all of Massachusetts police departments, and that will include a requirement that the cameras have to have technology for redacting images and the voices of victims and bystanders. They'll also set forth standards for training law enforcement agencies in the basic use of body-worn cameras. And they'll have standards on things such as when a camera should be activated, what the retention schedules look like, how departments will handle public records requests, and right down to sanctions for tampering with recordings.
Thank you, Chief. Mr. Christiana?
Yeah, I definitely appreciate all that detail. That's very helpful. I'm wondering if you could ask the chief if she would have any thought about where $43,000, if it were removed from the budget through this amendment tonight, how that would impact services. Since, as you said, Mr. Moderator, we don't have the power or authority as town meeting to strike line items. So could the chief give any indication about how that cut might be absorbed?
Chief Flaherty, do you understand his question?
Yes, I do. Julie Flaherty, Chief of Police. If that $43,000 was removed from the budget, we would not move forward with body-worn cameras at this time.
That answers all the questions. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, Mr. Christiana. Timur Yantar?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Timur Yantar, Precinct 7. My question is regarding Mr. Ellis's proposed amendment as well. And the way I understood it from his supporting documents and his letter to your Arlington, it's to be conditional. It would be a withholding of the funds until a policy is adopted. And my question, Mr. Moderator, through you, I'd like to ask somebody, perhaps the town manager, whether a conditional or contingent budget item can be proposed.
We had that, myself and Attorney Heim had that discussion with Mr. Ellis, and I'll ask Mr. Heim to address that. Mr. Heim, can we conditionally approve a budget item, or is it all or nothing?
Doug Heim, Town Council, no, we can't condition a budget appropriation on some future action. The only sort of context in which that arises is something called a contingent appropriation relative to an override, but not with respect to the passage of a specific policy. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Yantar?
That's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Dre, Elizabeth Dre?
Good evening, Mr. Moderator. I rise in support of Mr. Ellis's amendment. I'd like to thank Chief Flaherty and Mr. Chapdelaine. They have been very responsive to my questions via email this last week as I've tried to gain a deeper understanding of this line item and the implications. And ultimately, I decided to rise to support Mr. Ellis's amendment. I'd like to clarify that this vote is not about whether or not you like body cameras or don't like body cameras. And it's definitely not about whether you support the police department or don't support the police department. It is about process and fiscal responsibility at a time when we face a budget shortfall in the upcoming years, and we will be likely asking voters for an override. In simple terms, we are being asked to spend money to fund a policy that does not yet exist. And because that policy does not exist, we do not know or understand the total cost of that policy. What we do know is that this is a 5-year contract at $43,000 a year. And that's all we know. We don't know what that policy will cost us all in with all the other stuff, including the costs negotiated through collective bargaining that may be up to $1,000 per officer and an additional several hours of paid leave times 68 officers. That's a big chunk of money. And that's all unknown because that's going to happen in collective bargaining. To me, it does not make sense to begin to blindly pour money into a yet to be developed program without knowing the ongoing annual cost at a time where we are facing a shortfall. For me, it's putting the cart before the horse. I look forward to the town manager and the chief of police sharing with the public their fully developed policy regarding body cameras and the use and storage of the videos, so that we as town meeting members can make informed decisions and make an informed vote at the next town meeting. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, ma'am. Lynette Culverhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Lynette Culverhouse, Precinct 11. I have 2 questions. The first one is I'd just like to know why the position of social worker was reduced to 3/4 time.
Chief Flaherty.
Julie Flaherty, Chief of Police. I'm not sure I understand the question. We have at the police department a full-time clinician that is a co-responder for our jail diversion program. And we also have a full-time social worker that works with the police department for our homeless outreach and is funded partly by the police department and partly by Health and Human Services.
That could be why. So 3/4 of it is through the police department and 25% through Health and Human Services?
Correct.
Yeah. Do you understand that rationale, Ms. Culverhouse?
I do.
Okay.
Is that a change this year? Because it says it's minus 13.33%, the line item. So the way it's budgeted has changed to be split.
It would appear that way. Is that correct, Chief?
So it's a fairly new position that we just filled last year, and that's how it was budgeted.
Very good.
Okay, and I've forgotten my other question. I'm sorry, Mr. Moderator. It's gone.
Ah.
Hold on. Yes, my other question has to do with the policy, and I just would like to ask Chief Flaherty whether and if she has, how has she solicited input from residents on what a policy overseeing the use of body cameras would look like? I think that it would be important to have resident input, and I hope that she's has a plan to do that.
Chief?
So I have been researching best practices and working with professional organizations to develop policy that's in line with Massachusetts accreditation standards. And as I stated, we will go in front of the select board for approval on the final policy. At this time, I have not solicited any input from the community.
And is there a plan to solicit input?
I do not have a plan at this time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Ms. Culverhouse. Mr. Fossett?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Moderator. Charles Fossett, Precinct 8, and Chairman of the Finance Committee. I just wanted to provide a little bit of background to this subject as it evolved in our Finance Committee hearings. This concern of the nature and policies of surrounding body-worn cameras was brought up by Mr. Ellis at the Finance Committee on February 17th of this year. And it engendered an extensive debate. And it's clear that there are risks with the use of body-worn cameras, but there are also many benefits of such cameras, both for Arlington citizens and for Arlington's police department. After a lengthy debate, the Finance Committee voted 16-1 to approve the police budget as presented. And I think I could summarize the general consensus of the Finance Committee was that it wasn't the task of the Finance Committee to manage the use of cameras. When we have a professional police executive managing the department, reporting to a professional town manager, and when we have an elected select board setting policy and overseeing both the town and the police department. Nonetheless, I was sufficiently concerned about the nature of the question that I requested Daryl Harmer and Jonathan Wallach, who monitor the police budget, to prepare a list of relevant questions for Chief Flaherty on the subject, and to consult with John Ellis in the process, preparing a memorandum and then I asked for her, and I asked that this memo be copied to the chair of the board of to the select board and to the town manager, and that was sent on March 2nd. The chief responded on March 3rd with a strong commitment to transparency in this process, and with reference to with much more detail that she provided this evening, with reference to the state body worn camera program, which is part of the general statewide movement towards police reform. I think the general opinion of the Finance Committee is that eventually we are going to have to use body-worn cameras, and we will have standards to live by, and they will be universal standards applied across the state. I think that the chief provided a very serious and thoughtful response both to the Finance Committee and to her comments tonight. And I think that the best path here would be to have professional town management deal with this complex issue. And I strongly recommend that the town meeting support the budget of the police department without change and vote no action on the proposed amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. John Marr? Mr. Marr, can you unmute? You can unmute now, John. Little microphone at the bottom left. Little line over it.
Moderator.
There you go.
Sorry. John Marr, Precinct 14. I wanted to just emphasize and approve the comments of Mr. Fossett, who said pretty much what I was going to say. I think the proponent of the substitute motion, although well-intentioned, fails to take into account that town meeting does not set policy. We appropriate funds. We leave it to the Board of Selectmen, primarily the Chief of Police and our professional management, to set policy of the town. We've seen body cameras be a critical component for fostering responsible policing throughout the country, and as we do not need to take a step back in Arlington. So I strongly support the recommendation of the Finance Committee to pass the police budget as presented. And I do have one question, if I may, Mr. Moderator. I'd like to ask the town manager for his position on the substitute motion attempting to amend the police budget. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Chaplain, do you have a position on the Mr. Ellis's amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator and Mr. Marr. Adam Chaplain, Town Manager. I would prefer the substitute motion or the amendment, not pass, as I do think that implementing a body-worn camera program for the Arlington Police Department would be of benefit to both the community and the Arlington Police Department. But I would say, for obvious reasons, the will of town meeting is what will follow in that vote. And I think it's worth reiterating that should the amendment pass, we would not go forward with implementing a program until July 1st, 2022, at the earliest, when we would consider coming back for funding at next year's town meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chaplain. Anything else, Mr. Marr?
No, thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, sir. John Ellis. I promised Mr. Ellis you'd get another chance.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I won't restate what I already said, but I would like to point out that there's still a lot of work to be done. The policy isn't developed. We don't even know how much the police union will ask for. And I don't think it's an undue burden to wait another 12 months, given that the first 6 months of that will be taken figuring out what the policy is and what the cost is. And I'd also like to ask the town manager about his plans for the select board voting, approving, endorsing the policies so that there can be community input into how videos of Arlington's residents are stored, shared, viewed, and managed.
I think that would be more appropriately put to Mr. DeCourcy, the head of the select board, as to what their policy is going to be.
Okay.
Mr. DeCourcy?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Moderator. Yeah, and onto that point, I have not had specific discussions with Mr. Chapdelaine in terms of when that will be brought before the board or how it will be brought before the board. I know the intention that it will be as the chief continues drafting this policy, and we certainly plan on having a public meeting to receive the draft policy, but I don't have specifics to present to the town meeting at this time.
Okay, Mr. Ellis?
No more questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Jordan Weinstein?
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I stand in support of John Ellis's amendment and feel as if there's a bit of a misconception about the benefits of body cams. It's not one size fits all. And there are studies that have been done in particular about the Los Angeles Police Department and its use of body cameras that doesn't necessarily stack up to being worthy of its investment, and that there are other places that that money could be put, in particular, maybe more into the social services part of the budget, as somebody pointed out earlier, which has been cut. So if you want a bit of a broader based understanding of body cameras, look up that study in Los Angeles. I also think it's a bit of a cart before the horse, as other people have said, that we need a study first. We need to come up with a policy. And I was rather aghast when I heard the chief respond to a question by saying that she has no plans for obtaining community feedback on the body cam issue. Something as large as that, as significant as that, I think needs a better response.
I believe she said she had no plans yet, Mr. Weinstein.
Well, there are plans on the table to deploy body cameras. There should be some community build up to this. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Harrelson, Brooks Harrelson.
Mr. Moderator, we've just been asked to remind town meeting members to state their name and precinct before they speak.
Yes, thank you very much. I do note that Mr. Ellis hadn't given his name and precinct, so if everyone else would take that opportunity as soon as they speak. Thank you, Ms. Sullivan. Mr. Harrelson.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Brooks Harrelson, Precinct 16. I rise in opposition to this amendment. I've got a number of years of history with the police department, and I've always been very pleased with the way they approach new policies. They have approached town commissions and other town groups within Vision Arlington to help review policies. I expect that that would be a similar situation in this particular case. And historically, the police have really been at the forefront of community-oriented policing with anti-bias training and de-escalation training. I have little doubt that they would work with the community or with the efforts within Massachusetts to apply common standards for the use of these body cameras. As far as it's going to take 6 months before they're in use. If this budget passes, it will take a year and 6 months before they're in use if the amendment passes. I don't see that as a benefit. I believe that there would be immediate benefit to implementing them now for all of the reasons that Mr. Weinstein stated. And regarding the reference to the Los Angeles Police Department, Los Angeles is actually my hometown, and it contains a police force that is one of the worst in the country from the standpoint of overreach and discrimination and extreme force. I don't think that's an appropriate comparison at all to the Arlington Police Department. And so I strongly urge the defeat of this amendment and the passage of the budget, including the body cams for implementation under the discretion of the police and the town select board and the town manager. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Harrelson. Mr. Jameson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. Gordon Jameson, Precinct 12. In Mr. Ellis's amendments, he mentioned a fund, which I tend to keep track of these things. Could that fund be described briefly, very quickly? Is that a revolving fund, and what has its past usage been?
I think by you use the word general fund, he just meant the treasury.
No, I think he was talking about a special seized items fund.
No, it says remove 43,000 from police department budget.
But
placing this amount into the general fund.
But that's what the amendment. The body cams are going to be funded out of a different pot of money. Could we have some more information about that fund?
They're being funded out of the. If the body cams are being funded through the police budget expense items this year.
I didn't hear that from Mr. Ellis. So did I hear that wrong? Could Mr. Fossett perhaps provide insight?
Yeah, Mr. Fossett, can you confirm that they're being funded out of the expense line item?
The $43,000 is not a capital expense for the cameras themselves. It's for the support of the service that is managing the disposition of the camera information over time. I think that Mr. Jameson is correct that the acquisition of the cameras is coming from a specific police fund having to do with funds, I guess, by liquidating seized assets.
Thank you, Mr. Fossett. Mr. Moderator, I'd like to know the balance of that fund and its past uses.
I think perhaps we'd have to ask the chief or the town manager for that. That's not something
Yes.
I have at my fingertips.
Mr. Chaplain?
Adam Chaplain, town manager. I actually have to defer to the chief as that's a fund that's statutorily under the chief's control.
Okay. Chief Flaherty?
Julie
Third tries the
Flaherty,
charm.
Chief of Police, that is correct. It's an asset forfeiture fund. We were taking $113,000 for hardware, so we wouldn't put the burden on the town and ask for that money. That money is controlled under very strict guidelines by the Department of Justice, and it is used for mostly training and equipment. Anything that we purchase has to be approved by the Department of Justice.
And
you
the
know how
balance
much
of the
it's
fund?
It's approximately $158,000 right now.
Okay, and perhaps Mr. Pooler in the future could add that to the quote unquote revolving fund information in the budget. My next question is, while I have the chief, you're going to present to the select board. Do you have a timeline for that? And I assume the select board presentation will provide for comment.
Chief, do you understand the question?
Yes, I do. Julie Flaherty, Chief of Police. And yes, the select board presentation will allow for community comment. And as far as the timeline goes, if these funds are approved, the town will work with the unions for collective bargaining purposes, and then we'll move forward with completing the draft policy and go before the board.
And do you have a timeline for that, Chief?
I would hope to have the policy in place by August or September and have the cameras deployed by September.
Thank you for anticipating my next question, when they might be deployed. The $1,000 that have been ballpark mentioned that other communities have added for extra effort. Could you talk about that $1,000, and is that covered in this year's budget?
I can't speak to that. That's collective bargaining. That $1,000 came from a survey that was done with neighboring police departments who have recently deployed body-worn cameras.
Okay, I sort of figured that this is part of the modern. Personally, I think this is part of the modern duties of a police officer of the stature of the Arlington Police Department. So I'm not so keen on the extra money, but I understand that there's training and that there's perhaps extra time before and after shift for maintenance of the cameras, and that might require that. So if there is extra cost, I assume that will be taken out of the FinCom reserve fund to pay for this year.
Mr. Fossett, is that extra cost projected in this budget that we're looking at?
There's no extra cost projected, and if the town manager requests such funds, the finance committee would have to address it. I can't speak for what the finance committee will decide sometime in the future.
Okay, thank you very much.
It's a highly speculative question because we don't know that the cost is going to exist.
I understand, Mr. Foskett. Thank you. I'm against the amendment. I'm for the deploy of body cameras. I think the manager and our department head, the very capable chief of police, will develop policies. They'll present it to the select board for comment in public, as all select board hearings are. And this is $43 million we're talking about out of 180 to $200 million total all-in budget. So
43,000.
Pardon me?
You said 43 million. I think you meant 43,000.
43,000, yes, out of 180 to 200 million total budget. Thank you, Mr. Moderator, for correcting me. Yeah. And so I'm against the amendment, but definitely for the apt deploy of body cameras in the community to further accentuate our police force's abilities. Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, sir. Mustafa Gveroglu.
Have I become unmuted?
Yes, sir. You're unmuted.
This is Mustafa Varaglu, Precinct 10. I want to go back to that social worker question, where it's 3/4 of an employee under the police services. I went through the Health and Human Services budget, and the only designated social worker I see is under Council on Aging. And I'm wondering if somebody could clarify where the other 1/4 of a social worker has gone.
Mr. Moderator, I can answer that. This is Adam.
Okay.
Chaplin.
Very good, Mr. Chaplain. I was going to look to you or Mr.
Sorry, Adam Chaplin, Town Manager. That's a very good question. It's actually contained on page B19, Budget E, the Arlington Youth Counseling Center Enterprise Fund, about 2/3 the way down the budget. Case Manager / Homeless Outreach, 0.25, funded in years FY21 and 22 in this budget.
So in the previous year, we have 1.25 social workers in 21, and now we're going to go to 1.0.
Do you follow, Mr. Chaplain?
My understanding is this, Adam Chaplin, Town Manager, is that this has been one position. I think the chief could clarify if I'm wrong and there was an additional part-time position.
Chief, does that need clarification?
Julie Flaherty, Chief of Police. There is one full-time position in addition to jail diversion clinician.
I believe Mr. Pooler has a little bit of extra information for us on this point.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Sandy Pooler, Deputy Town Manager. I think the reporting of where the money was in the police department last year was inaccurate, in as much as even though there was a full amount in the police department budget, there was in fact some being paid out of AYCC, and this year's budget just more accurately reflects where the money is coming from.
Okay, so on the Case Manager Homeless Outreach, there were 2 years where it's 0.25 for about the same amount each year, 21 and 22, or I mean the future years. And then I see, if you look at the numbers, it's going down by about 9,000 as 3/4 down from a full-time position. I'm just having a really hard time making it add up to either a consistent 1.25 or a consistent 1. I can't
Mr. Moderator.
Yeah, Mr. Pooler?
It is and has been a consistent 1.0 FTEs. There was never 1.25. There's been no reduction in the number of social workers being paid for by the police and AYCC budgets.
I understand the words, but I don't understand how the numbers reflect that.
I believe, Mr. Pooler, can you confirm Chief Flaherty mentioned that this was a newly hired position? Is that correct? And is the person at a lower starting salary than the person that left?
Mr. Moderator, that I would have to confirm, but I would just say that in putting these budgets together, originally it was thought that the police department would carry the full load. It was then determined that there would be a split between the two departments, and that's how the budgets look for FY22, which are now an accurate representation of where the money is coming from.
And where it's going?
We had that in FY21 as well. We had a 1/4 Case Manager Homeless Outreach in 21.
Yes, but the police department budget was not accurate. EYCC was accurate.
Okay, so are you saying 21 should have been 0.75?
Yes.
Okay. I guess I'll accept that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Pooler. Thank you, Mr. Veraglu. Bob Flaherty, excuse me, Bobby Jefferson.
Yeah, Bob Jeffson, Precinct 12. Mr. Moderator, would a motion to terminate debate on budget number 19 and Mr. Ellis's amendment be in order?
Yes.
Then I make that motion.
Okay, so motion to terminate debate on budget 19 and Mr. Ellis's amendment. Do we have a second? It has been seconded. Okay, so Mr. Kurowski, we're going to take a motion to terminate debate on budget 19 and the amendment by Mr. Ellis. And that would be a 2/3 vote.
So this is not for the complete article, is that correct, Mr. Moderator?
Correct. It's just for this one budget alone. And it would be a terminate debate for this one budget item.
And that's the amendment or the police budget?
It's going to be a combined.
Okay.
And this is strictly to terminate debate. We're not voting on the amendment up or down right now. Okay, so town meeting members, as soon as he enables voting, you can start to migrate over to the portal, precincts 1 through 7 first. After a little bit, 8 to 15. And 15 through 21. So if you wish to terminate debate on budget number 19 and Mr. Ellis's amendment, we are going to vote 1 yes to terminate debate on that budget item 19 only. If you don't want to terminate debate, you'll vote no on that. Cast your vote. If you cannot do either one, you can use the chat feature in Zoom. You can chat your vote, yes or no. And if that doesn't work, you can text your vote to 617-575-9266. And this is to terminate debate on budget number 19 and Mr. Ellis's amendment. So go ahead and use the portal page if you can. If you can't, please chat your vote. And Mr. Jameson has a point of order. We'll bring Mr. Jameson up on his point of order while we continue to vote.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Gordon Jameson, Precinct 12. Hopefully the town clerk can make an administrative change to this vote to include the termination of debate on budget 19. Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator.
Yep. What the town clerk does is different from what we see. So go ahead and vote, town meeting members. If you haven't voted yet, please use the portal, chat your vote in. And if that doesn't work, you can text it 617-575-9266. And if all else fails, you can call Ms. Brazil at 781-316-3071. I'm just waiting for the thumbs up. There are a lot of people who have chatted in their votes. If they're having trouble with the portal, let's try and figure out why before we get to too many more votes tonight. We have a lot of people chatting it in, more than should be happening then with the portal. Go back to the portal and reattempt to vote. Refresh your page and try again. Okay, we got all the votes entered. We're all set with the text votes, Mr. Krosky? Yep, all right, so let's close voting on the motion to terminate debate. Motion passes 79%. We have 184 in the positive, 49 in the negative. Debate is terminated on budget article number 19. And we're going to take our 7 times 4, 28 seconds, look through the screens, and then move on to fire services. Mr. Warden has a point of order. Mr. Warden, you live mic. Hello, Mr. Warden. John, you're good to go.
Mr. Moderator, oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I allowed Patricia Warden to speak in case there's some confusion there.
Yeah, they're both up and they're both muted. So either one of them could unmute and make the point of order. Hello, John. Mr. Warden, I'm going to give up in a second. Patricia, does your microphone work? Hello, Pat, we can hear you. Please talk.
Yeah, go ahead, speak it.
Oh,
What? The point of order.
Get into the, he can't get to, he is unmuted. Hello?
Yeah, I can hear every word you're saying. What's John's point of order?
His point of order, I think, is that he thinks it should be time for recess.
Well, yeah, we just finished a vote, and I'm going to take Mr. Harrelson's point of order and then take a recess because it's 9:30.
Thank you. I don't know
Thank you.
He could speak. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. We'll take Mr. Harrelson's point of order, then we'll take our 10-minute break.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Brooks Harrelson, Precinct 16. It's really a point of information. We'll vote on the amendment at the end when we vote on the entire article.
Yes, we will, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I'll remind everyone of that fact. Okay, it's 9:30. We're going to take our 10-minute break right now. So when we come back, we're going to have fire services, and then we'll continue with the budgets. So I think Miss Wayland has picked out a nice musical interlude for us, and we're going to go from there.
essential for sewing, but maybe not for people with certain inflammatory conditions, because there are options, like an injection, Xeljanz. The first and only pill of its kind that treats moderate to severe rheumatoid arthritis, psoriatic arthritis, or moderate to severe ulcerative colitis, when other medicines have not helped enough. Xeljanz can lower your ability to fight infections. Before and during treatment, your doctor should check for infections like TB and do blood tests. Tell your doctor if you've had hepatitis B or C, have flu-like symptoms, or are prone to infections. Serious, sometimes fatal infections, cancers, including lymphoma, and blood clots have happened. Taking a higher than recommended dose of Xeljanz for RA may increase risk of death. Tears in the stomach or intestines and serious allergic reactions have happened. Needles. Fine for some, but for you, there's a pill that may provide symptom relief. Ask your doctor about the pill first prescribed for RA more than 7 years ago. Xeljanz, an injection.
I'm partnering up with J. Crew on this little try-on haul. These ones are a winner! Sazan must have in my closet. Oh my God, this incredible trench coat. Like, how chic is that?
Quarter chicken dark.
Okay, is Adam back? Oh, got quiet all of a sudden. Okay, as soon as you get Adam back, we're ready to go. Here we go. Okay, so town meeting, we're back in order. We now have before us budget 20, fire services. Anyone wish to speak to budget 20? Oh. Okay, now these people I want to speak to budget 20 fire services. Or are they left over from the last one? Okay, Mr. Schlickman, do you wish to speak to this budget?
No, I do not wish to speak to 20.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so town meeting members, if you were left over, please go back to the portal page and lower your hand so we can tell who actually wishes to speak to budget 20. I'm going to give a second to clear yourself out, then I will start calling your name if you're still on the speaking list. Okay, Miss Muldoon. Oh, Patty didn't want to. Mr. Marshall? Mr. Marshall, do you wish to speak to budget 20? Hi, Mr. Marshall. You want to unmute? Hi, Terrence, you there? Mr. Marshall, you can unmute. Okay, Mr. Marshall, I guess we're going to wait for one more second, and guess he doesn't want to speak. Well, next time, Ms. Barron. Mr. Marshall, if you want to speak, get back on the list. Ms. Barron, you wish to address Article 20?
Hi, Mr. Moderator. I'm just having trouble finding Miss Barron in the attendees list. I don't know if she's in Zoom. I don't see her.
Okay. Okay, let's try Miss Malofchek. Oh, well, excuse me, Miss Benedict.
Beth Benedict, Precinct 21. I'm just wondering what school credits are. I see them both on the police budget and the fire department budget. I'm wondering if I can find out more about that.
Yep, we'll have the fire chief address that.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. This is Kevin Kelly, Fire Chief, and good evening, everybody. Yes, so on the fire side, at least, we just have a school education incentive program. So if a firefighter goes to college and earns credits, they earn so much money per credit, up to an associate's degree.
Any other questions on that, Ms. Benedict? Did that
Is
answer
that
your
the same
question?
for the police department too?
No, ours is different. Again, Chief Flaherty could probably speak in more detail, but I think they primarily fall under the Quinn bill, which is a little more robust program than ours. Again, we're only paid up to an associate's degree.
Okay. Thank you. I'd be interested in hearing about the school credits for the police department if that's okay.
Well,
Or did I miss my chance?
we finished the police budget.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else wish to discuss the fire services? Seeing none, that ends Article 20. Brings us to Article 21, Inspectional Services. Anyone wish to discuss Inspectional Services? Budget 21 on page 10. Mr. Schlickman.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Paul Schlickman, Precinct 9. I noticed the building inspector line item was 2.2 full-time equivalent in 2019. It was brought down to 1.6 last year and is projected to be a 1.6 FTE for fiscal 22. Has the workload decreased significantly so that we reduced the inspectional services?
Mr. Byrne?
Good evening, Michael Byrne, Director of Inspectional Services. No, the workload has not decreased. We're dealing more, we're using more part-time staff, which just seems to be working well. And yeah, we're continuing on. I think we're being pretty successful.
Let me ask a follow-up question. I have a follow-up question. Then if I may,
Yes.
let's say hypothetically that there is a violation of the town bylaw that is under the jurisdiction of inspectional services. Let's say, for example, a violation of the 25% window requirement on signage. If somebody goes out and assesses a fine and that fine is paid, how does that money circle back? So is there a revenue stream from inspecting potential violations that get back to provide for the people who are going out there and doing the inspections?
Michael Byrne, Director of Inspectional Services. Generally not for something like that. The idea is to get compliance, and if it was to say a sign, the way the bylaw is written, we would go out and address it, and you have to give an appropriate time for someone to fix it before you get into the fining. I would say it's very rare that we get into fining for signs.
Do we have a sense of how often we have a sign violation that is written up or taken action upon, or do we not do that?
Well, up until this last year, Paul, I think that you could, again, Michael Byrne, Director of Inspection Services, I'm sorry. Until this last year, we would, as time allowed, we would take different sections of the town and try to walk around and see what violations and address them with the store owner or whatever. But as far as, I mean, again, our attitude is compliance. So with the way the bylaw is written and giving someone the appropriate time to fix that, when it comes to our attention, or if we see it, or if someone gives us a complaint, that's generally where it stops. Most people do not, because the fines go $25 a day, $50 a day, $100 a day, and then we can go to the select board and ask for $300 a day. So I can't remember the last time someone really had a big issue with it when we actually get a complaint and go in, or like I said, up until the last year or so, we would try to get different parts of the town.
I'm just trying to figure out that I see a lot of non-compliance around town. And I'm wondering if budgetarily we need to increase this number. That's sort of the point where I'm getting at.
Yeah.
Okay, I'd like to have Mr. Chapdelaine address that. He thinks he has an answer for us.
So thank you, Mr. Moderator. Adam Chapdelaine, Town Manager. If I may, I'd offer a few things. First, if you look at the inspectional services budget, you'll see that as the building inspector line goes down from 2.2 to 1.6, there is an increase starting in FY21 for principal, clerk, and typist, corresponding to that decrease. And that was a result of, after talking with Mr. Byrne, making a collective decision that the inspectors were overburdened in terms of the paperwork being performed in the office, and their time would be better served out in the field performing inspections if we were able to provide them administrative support. And that's where you see the change in investment. It's not really a decrease in investment in the department, but a change in the way the investment is made. So that would be the first thing I would offer. Second, revenues collected either by fine or permit by any department all go back into the general fund and are then part of the town's total revenue, which is then allocated amongst town departments and schools based on the efforts of the long-range plan and the long-range planning committee. And then the final thing I'll say is we did actually propose this year for the Inspectional Services Division the addition of a part-time code enforcement officer in the amount of $35,000 to try to give some more support to the Inspectional Services Division as it enforces, as it tries to get through really what has been a not slowing down number of building permit applications even during the pandemic, as well as enforcing things like the Good Neighbor bylaw. After a review, the Finance Committee decided to not approve that request this year, but that is something that I would like to continue to pursue potentially in a future fiscal year to make sure that we're providing adequate support to inspectional services to fulfill its duties.
Thank you, Mr. Chapdelaine. Mr. Schlickman, you still have the floor.
Okay, so then a follow-up question. If we had the additional $35,000, say, what would be the probability of the Gentle Dental people across the street from Town Hall, which has for years covered their entire windows with advertising, being brought into compliance with the sign bylaw?
Adam Chapdelaine, maybe Mr. Byrne could answer better than I can, but I would suggest that, just given Mr. Schlickman's raising of that matter tonight, Mr. Byrne or his staff could likely look into that very quickly.
Michael Byrne, Director of Inspection Services. Yes, thank you very much for that. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. No further questions.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Jameson.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. Gordon Jameson, Precinct 12. As Mr. Fossett alluded to in his introduction to the FinCom budget, and Mr. Revelek noted earlier, I think tonight, new growth is a critical part of our potentially being financially sustainable. And in that, it all starts with the timely processing of building permits. Anecdotally, and I admit it's anecdotally, I've heard lots of stories about the time that it takes to get a permit in town. And so my question is the average time between application and issuance of a permit tracked for, performance metrics?
Chief, excuse me, Mr. Byrne.
Yep. Michael Byrne, Director of Inspection Services. Gordon, we don't keep like actual numbers, but we do have a general feel. And right now, yeah, it is running probably 2 or 3 weeks longer than we'd like it to. But I think it's mostly because we're trying to be very careful in the office with the right amount of people in at one time. And maybe everyone's making sure they do the inspections properly with PPE, et cetera. So things are taking a little longer, but I would say that the numbers are still very good. I think that we'll probably do as well as we did last fiscal year.
And in that regard, what's the average? So I also would group under this inquiry the average time for from a request from an inspection during an ongoing permit. So if someone has to come out and look at rough plumbing or electric to the visit. I would just comment that given the importance of this to our financial sustainability, that these metrics actually be tracked with real real numbers, so we can understand what the timeline is. We want to be a town that can tout how fast you can get a permit under appropriately conferred under our bylaws, and so that it can build new growth. And I think that's very important. I noted that the previous speaker mentioned the compliance officer that was denied by the FinCom, and especially in lieu of the, could someone from the FinCom talk to that more succinctly and quickly? Why it was denied?
Mr. Fossett?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Charles Fossett, Precinct 8, and Chairman of the Finance Committee. First of all, let me note that the whole subject of whether an additional person was necessary in this department was initially raised by the Finance Committee, not by the town manager. We asked, whether the department was overburdened and whether we needed an additional any additional person power there, and we asked both the inspections department and the fire department to provide data, quantitative data that could justify the adding of an additional person. We didn't receive, after a number of requests, we did not receive any data that justified that position. So therefore, we decided, while we had a request for a position, we had no data that justified it. And we also noted that in the prior 2 years, the overtime budget was not fully utilized, in fact, barely utilized, which didn't indicate that the department was overworked. So the Finance Committee determined that it wasn't an appropriate request to support.
Thank you, Mr. Fossett. I have an additional question for the director, Mr. Byrne, I believe. Given the fact that we have a $300 million project underway for the next couple of years, and of course, inspecting that appropriately to make sure that we don't end up having a surprise 20 years from now when something wasn't done correctly, does the department feel like they need additional staffing to staff for the high school project?
Michael Byrne, Director. Yeah, Michael Byrne, Director of Inspectional Services. Good. So far, so good. I mean, Inspector Champa is over there almost daily. We're getting all our engineer and architect reports in a timely manner. I think, as you can tell, it's going very well, very quickly, and very safely. No, I hope I don't jinx that. I think right now everything's okay.
And so I would suggest that should any workload issues arise, or and again, I would also first, to go back to Mr. Fossett's comments. I'm sorry for the stuttering around. I would suggest implementing some type of metrics and tracking would be very useful in the future for confirming the need for additional personnel if determined. And that should, even during this year, you find that your staff is overtaxed, that you appeal to the Finance Committee and solicit funds for perhaps additional part-time staff to out of their reserve fund, which measures $1.8 million. Lastly, I have a question. In the DPW budget, I know Mr. Moderator is slightly off. There's a position for civic engineer permitting. Does that impact the permitting process? Or maybe Mr. Byrne can answer that.
Mr. Byrne?
Michael Byrne, Director of Inspection Service. I'm Gordon. I'm sorry. I don't know that position. I don't know what their role is going to be.
Okay, so I just think as others have mentioned, and we need to keep our eye on the ball here. That being a community that is welcoming to development under our bylaws, that we need to grow that perception amongst the construction industry, and by being someone who's customer serviced, if you will, in that regard is paramount to having them saying, "Oh, I'll build. I have a project I can do. I can go next door, or I can go to Arlington." And Arlington is ready and willing to help us get things started. Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you. Mr. Revelak?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Steve Revelak, Precinct 1. I'd like to actually follow up on a few of Mr. Jameson's questions. If the inspectional services were to, have another staff position to do enforcement, what would that individual be doing? Would they, I'd assume Mr. Schlickman would like them to, to talk to the folks at Gentle Dental, but beyond that, would they be looking just kind of ride around and look for vehicles that had two wheels parked off the driveway, or, roughly how would that work?
Yeah. Michael Byrne, Director of Inspectional Services. I'll tell you right now, we would be doing some plan review. Because we've always taken pride in customer service and wanting those builders or the homeowners or the contractors to come back and want to be in this town. I think most of them do. We try very hard to make sure we always have prided ourselves in doing inspections the same day. You don't find that in other communities. Permits, we've never gone over 30 days. Unfortunately, with the pandemic and other towns, many other communities have to do the same thing. Other communities shut their building departments down. We didn't do that. We closed for about a half a day when we had a meeting when it all started. But we've been open every day since, and the whole department's pretty proud of that. It may take a little longer, but we've kept this industry going. I think we've been able to get the school going on time. And we look forward to public works going on time. So I think, but anyways, getting back to the original question, the plan review would be number one for us to catch up on where we're at. We have a bit of backlog to get some more field inspections. So, I asked Mr. Champa the other day, and he did 20 inspections one day. That's in a pandemic. That's a lot to be asking someone. But we're doing it, and this is what we do. This is what we enjoy, and I think the town appreciates it.
So, in other words, if you were to have additional staff, it would be more along the lines of doing a more thorough job of inspecting projects that are underway, whether it's a preliminary plan review or just not having to jump from 20 sites, back and forth, spending a little more time looking at the plumbing or the wiring or the framing or the insulation.
Yeah, Michael Byrne, Director of Inspection Services. Yes, actually, the hands-on, the daily grind. Yes, I think that would be in signs as well.
Okay, that is. I have no further questions. Thank you, Mr. Moderator and Mr. Byrne.
Thank you, Mr. Revelak. Ms. Memon?
Yes, Serena Memon, Precinct 21. I have a question on, there's a principal clerk and a typist that was hired for 21 and 22. In the day of computers nowadays, is that a huge need in inspections? I can understand there's violations and they're changed, but there's a position, it looks like. Is that correct?
Yes, I think as Mr. Chapdelaine explained to us, that person took over the office component of the inspector's jobs, which is why the building inspectors went from a 2 to a 1.6. So they shifted the office work from the inspectors so they could be out in the field.
Okay. And the second thing I have is the base salary versus and steps versus salaries and other benefits. Some of the portions list base salary and steps, and some of them say salaries and other benefits. Is there a reason why they're different? Why and what do steps mean? Does that mean just extra costs?
I think we'll ask maybe Mr. Pooler.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Sandy Pooler, Deputy Town Manager. Steps are part of the pay systems, pay grids that we have for all of our staff. People are hired at a position and then they move up a certain number of steps until they reach the maximum of that position. Those steps vary. They're usually about 7 or 8 steps for each of those positions. So there is a base salary, which is sort of the start. And then if people are on the step system and still getting steps, you see that as a step. Some people, once they've maxed out, you just see their base salary.
Right. Okay, so this sounds like they're grades. So as they have more experience, they can move up levels. Correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And what does longevity mean? I see that listed. Is that supposed to be something outside of health insurance, or is this workers' compensation? What is longevity?
Mr. Pooler.
Mr. Moderator, Sandy Pooler, Deputy Town Manager. Within union contracts and for other non-union staff in town, there are different longevity payments. These are payments that are made to people, usually at 5-year increments. It's essentially a boost in pay for people the longer they stay here. It's I have to say, a common element of public contracts for public employees.
Okay. It seems like altogether I see for like the police was 76 police officers plus other employees, there'd be 30 or something. Is this like a 1% or something that the boost in every 5 years salary increase or adjustment?
Mr. Moderator, Sandy Pooler, Deputy Town Manager. Each contract has its own set of longevity payments. Most of them have a set dollar figure, and usually it starts somewhere around $500 and for the first 5 years, and then goes up maybe to like $800 after 10 years and so forth. There are a few contracts where those longevity payments are percent of the base pay, but as a general matter, they are set dollar figures.
Okay, great. Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, Ms. Memon. Ms. Leahy?
The promises of electric vehicles seem endless. Using electricity generated by...
That was interesting.
That was interesting. Lori Leahy, 21. I was really interested in what Paul said about signage enforcement, I guess you would call it, and Michael Burns' response to that. It seems like he was saying that there is not that they don't have the manpower to regularly enforce signage compliance. And I just wanted to know if I got that correct.
Mr. Byrne?
Yep, Michael Byrne, Director of Inspectional Services. Ms. Leahy, yes, so I apologize if I came off incorrectly. I don't know if it's so much the manpower. I think like with any business, there's priorities. And obviously our priority is safety and making sure that the plans are done, reviewed properly, inspections are done, and there's, and I don't want to say that it's not a priority, but signs might be a little secondary to our primary of safety. That anytime we get a complaint, we do absolutely address it. Do we go up and down the Ave as much as we wish, and especially during this pandemic? No, we don't. But I think that's about all I have to say.
Thank you. Could I have a follow-up question?
Yeah.
Okay. Would it be helpful to, instead of having to go door to door, maybe write a reminder letter to businesses, because I mean, there are so many non-compliant businesses in Arlington. There's all kinds of flying flags. I mean, there's just so many. The liquor stores that all the windows are covered with signage. There's just a lot, and I'm just wondering if there would be a simpler way to address it, given that it's not a priority. Maybe letter writing.
Yeah, again, Michael Byrne, directors, but I don't want to say it's not a priority. I mean, anytime we get a complaint, it's absolutely taken care of. So it's more of a complaint base, but anything that we do see that we take care of. And honestly, for me, the way I like to do it, I like to go into a store and speak to someone and explain to them, what it's about, and gain compliance that way. But absolutely, if you see something that's a violation, please bring it to our attention. Send us an email. Get us something, and we'll absolutely go out and take care of it.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak to inspectional services? Okay, seeing none, that completes inspectional services. Brings us to page B11, budgets 23, libraries. Anyone wish to speak to libraries? Elizabeth Ray wants to speak about libraries.
Good evening, Mr. Moderator. Elizabeth Ray, Precinct 8. I am surprised by the $60,000 a year for overtime, and I was wondering if someone could help me understand that number.
The Director of Libraries, please tell us.
Hi, Andrea Nicolai, Director of Libraries. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. So overtime is to support summer Saturdays and Sunday services at the library, and for any premium pay that goes along with those services. And that's what overtime covers.
Thank you. So just to clarify, so the librarians are paid overtime to work on weekends in the summer. Is that correct?
Yes. So Andrea Nicolai, Director of Libraries. So there's contractual premium pay that goes along with what's considered non-regular hours, and it does differ from contract to contract. So the Professional Librarians Union has one pay scale and set of overtime, and then the 680 staff have another. So that's hopefully that answers your question.
And is there a way to work around that, or is that a collective bargaining thing with the unions?
That's a collective bargaining piece in the union.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, ma'am. Elizabeth Carlton-Gayson.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Elizabeth Carlton-Geeson from Precinct 7. I have two clarification questions. I'm a little confused about some of the ways that the employees are listed. For example, the children's librarian is listed as 3.11 going to 4.11. And the adult librarian is 5.7, and just was hoping somebody could speak to why these are such non-traditional splits.
Okay, so what we're looking at is 5 years worth of listings, but the director?
I'm sorry, I need a little bit clarification on the question.
I just,
okay,
oh, sorry, Mr. Moderator.
No, go. So I was going to say, she's noticing after the children's librarian, it says 3.11 for 2 years. And then it was 4.11 and 4.11 for the last 3 years. And how those splits are determined. Correct?
Yes.
Case?
Yeah. I guess in a more general way, could you speak a little bit to the staffing? Because it seems like the cuts are somewhat untraditional in terms of percentage of time people work.
Can I ask which sheet you're referencing right now?
Certainly.
Page B11, budget 23, and I'm looking at children's librarian, and the numbers in parens.
I'm going to need a minute to pull that up. Thank you.
Mr. Moderator?
Yes, Mr. Pooler?
Sandy Pooler, Deputy Town Manager. Those are all, there are actually 4 people who are children's librarians. They are listed as, many of them work part-time. So what you're seeing is the addition of one person who's a 0.54, another person who's a 0.46, another person who's a 0.40, and then one person who's a full-time, and another person's a 0.71. So the number is an odd number because it's the amalgamation of smaller numbers of people working part-time.
Wonderful. Thank you. And then the second clarification is just, what is the nighttime differential?
That is, sorry, Andrea Nicolai, Director of Libraries. The night differential is for 680 staff who work past a certain hour. I believe it's 5 o'clock p.m.
680, Mr. Geisen, is the union.
Thank you. All right, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you. Mr. Deist?
Pass.
Pass, okay. Then Ms. Stone wishes to speak to libraries.
Betty Stone, Precinct 7. I wanted to follow up a tiny bit on Betsy Carlton Geeson's question about the full-time equivalent figures. And the Deputy Town Manager, Sandy Poole, helped to understand. I understand how the full-time equivalent figures come to be, but it seems clear in the entire budget that they're created completely mathematically, but in reality, when the director of the library says that there are 4 part-time children's librarians, I'm just curious, do they set their own number of hours that they would come up with a 0.46 or a 0.54 full-time equivalent? Because this is actually true throughout the entire budget. All the full-time equivalencies seem to be non-traditional, they're very mathematical. So I'm just kind of curious how that happens in all the departments. And we happen to be on the library right now, so that if someone is part-time 0.46 and someone else is 0.54, it sounds like that's maybe a difference of 1 or 1.5 hours of work or something. Is that how it works? That people are in all the departments kind of setting their hours? Someplace there was a clerk or a secretary who was a 0.71, not 0.75 or not 0.50, but.
Okay, I think we get the question. Mr. Pooler?
Yes,
Mr. Fossett?
Yes, the hours that people work in different departments are determined by the department managers and the job. So it's not a mathematical formula that's set in the back room. It's based on the needs in different departments. So if you need somebody for 3 days a week or 4 days a week or whatever, those are the numbers that drive whether a person's part-time or full-time.
Can I ask a follow-up question? Is a full-time job defined by the same number of hours in all the departments, or does that also vary? is it a 40-hour week, a 35-hour week that makes a full-time equivalent?
It's a 35-hour week, I believe.
Sorry?
A 35-hour week.
Standard for everybody.
I can't testify that is perhaps Sandy Pooler could comment on that, but I think it is standard for everybody.
Mr. Pooler?
Mr. Moderator, Sandy Pooler, Deputy Town Manager. That is also set by contract. Our laborers who are paid on an hourly basis have a 40-hour work week. Our other staff who are paid on an annual salary basis are on a 35-hour week. And then police and fire have their own unusual schedules depending on, some of them have a 24, some of them very different times of day. But that is the general framework. And I would agree with what Mr. Fossett said. It is the department who set the working hours. It is not the staff who determine that.
Sure. Thank you very much. If I have more questions, I'll bring it up with other folks offline. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to discuss libraries? Okay, seeing none, the library is completed. That was out of budget 23. I inadvertently skipped right over budget 22. One of the biggest budgets we have, education. So we now have the education budget, number 22 on page B10. Mr. Ciano, do you wish to speak to the education budget?
Mr. Moderator, point of order.
Yes, sir.
I do believe that representatives from the school department would like to speak on the education budget.
Okay. Frank, do you have something on education?
Yes, I haven't received a school committee report as I usually receive one. So that's my question.
Okay, I'll ask Dr. Bodie about that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Sir. Yep. Dr. Bodie?
Kathleen Bodie, Superintendent of Schools. We do have a report to town meeting. It is on our website, but I thought that the link to that was sent out to all town meeting members.
I'm checking on our website right now.
We have not only the annual report that we have been providing to town meeting, but we also have the complete budget as well. The report actually isn't as complete as the full budget.
That's on our website as well. The reports to town meeting. Yes, that was circulated some time ago. So you have the floor, Dr. Bodie.
Mr. Moderator, I'm very happy to take questions about the education budget. Our CFO, Mr. Michael Mason, is also with me tonight.
Very good. Do you wish to present it all or just ready to answer questions as they come?
We're ready to answer questions, yes.
Okay, very good. All right, does anyone have questions on the education budget? No questions at all on education. All righty. All right, not seeing, Beth Ann Friedman has a question. Ms. Friedman, you have the floor.
I'm waiting for unmute.
No, you're unmuted.
Oh, can you hear me?
I can.
Oh, thank you so much. This is Beth Ann Friedman, Precinct 15. I noticed in the school budget there were 39.6 new hires. Was that brought about by the pandemic, or that seems like a large number, and I'm trying to figure out why there was a need for so many new hires.
Oops.
No, go ahead, Doctor.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Friedman, for the question. A fair number of those are reserved positions. We do not really know how many students are going to be attending Arlington Public Schools. This year, we were down 279 students, and what we would have projected was many more than that, about twice as many. Mr. Mason could give you the exact numbers. So we have built in this year more reserve positions. The other positions that you will see listed in the budget summary are positions to address social emotional needs of our school. For example, a nurse, social workers. Some of these positions are actually not a 1.0 position. For example, you might have a Spanish position, which is there in order to make sure that we are able to schedule all the students at middle school into a Spanish class. So if I could go down, there's quite a few positions, and let me see what page it's on. It's on page 23 of the budget summary page. Is that the one that you're looking at?
Let me.
Ms. Friedman?
Yes, I'm trying to come up with it. I'm scrolling through it. Yes, it's on page 23.
Right. So I could speak to each of these positions, but generally these are there to address social emotional needs of our students next year, which we anticipate will be probably more than they have been in past years. And we know that from surveys that we have taken this year, some of these are support positions for teachers, which include literacy coaches and math coaches. We have, as I said, a social worker at the Addison Middle School and Gibbs Middle School. So all of these positions were very thoughtful. We were adding positions to meet what we anticipate will be the needs of our students next year.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Friedman. Anyone else wish to discuss the education budget? Mr. Marshall?
And thank you, Mr. Moderator. Terrence Marshall, Precinct 5. Dr. Bodie, in the early stages of the pandemic, who was the individual on your staff that helped you develop policy to either open or close schools? Was that a chief medical officer, chief nurse, or was that you primarily making those determinations? And do we have that person, and are they programmed?
Dr. Bodie, how were those decisions made?
The decisions, if you followed it last summer, we had an extensive number of meetings to discuss what would be the appropriate programming for the school year. Much of the guidance came through the Department of Education, Department of Public DPH, Public Health. I think that in terms of how many students were in each classroom was made on the decision of the spacing of the desks. I'm not sure if that's what you're referring to, but we had different sources of guidelines and recommendations that we were following. The Department of Education at that time gave a range of 3 to 6 feet with discussions within the school department, with the school committee, and our own health department. We decided that having desk space at 6 feet was the conservative and the best approach to the school year, because at that time, if you recall, we were all just learning more about the virus and what the sources of contagion, transmission would be. So I couldn't say that there was a single person. Certainly our director of nursing was involved in the decision, and as well as all of our principals, as I said, school committee, and we certainly consulted with our the health department.
Thank you, Dr. Bodie. That answers my question. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Ashley. Marshall, I'm sorry. Mr. Ray?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Elizabeth Ray, Precinct 8. I am looking in the budget to try to find information about translation and interpretation costs to support the English language learner families. And I'm wondering if you could talk to me about that and where I can find it and if that's sufficient. Thank you.
Dr. Bodie?
We do have money set aside as part of our program for special education. For that matter, our English language learner program. There is a need for translation, and we are contract a lot of that out. It's in the special education, and I would ask Mr. Mason if he would join me here at this point to talk more specifically about that. But we've actually increased our funding for that as the needs have increased as well. Mr. Mason?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Bodie, and thank you to Mr. Chair. Michael Mason, School Chief Financial Officer. And in regards to translation services that are specific to special education and the general education populations that might be tied to the English language learners, that those budgets are specifically spelled out between special education and the administration for curriculum and personnel. The exact numbers are not presented as they are a part of the total budget, and I do not specifically have the numbers immediately to provide to you at this moment, if that's what's asked.
Thank you. When you say you have both used the word translation, I'm also wondering, is there an interpretation budget so that
yes,
when parents, they can come to parent conferences and have their conferences interpreted?
Yes. Go ahead, Mr. Mason.
Correct. We do have, that's included in the translation budgets. So there is translations and interpretation services. And it's a combination. It's typically a service that we do contract out to a vendor for those particular services.
Thank you. And last I checked, the school handbook for the high school still had not been translated out of English into the major languages. Has that been done yet?
The entire program of studies?
No, the handbook that you give to parents and students, what policies and, the dress code and how the bells system works, all that kind of, the student handbook.
Yes. Well, several years ago, there were a number of documents that were required to be translated, and they have been translated. I don't know the answer to your question, Ms. Dre, but I certainly can look into that. And
I think that these are questions that are a little bit out of scope with a budget, Ms. Dre, and maybe better brought up to the school committee during their discussions, because we are only passing their budget, and how they're going to spend that money is be appropriately brought up to them.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you.
I look forward to hearing more about that, Superintendent Dr. Bodie. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, ma'am. Jennifer Mansfield.
Hello, thank you. Jennifer Mansfield, Precinct 9. I was wondering about the special education budget, how it was listed as 2.4% less for the 2022 year. And that was surprising considering the toll of the pandemic hitting special education students harder. I was surprised that less resources seem to be headed in that direction. I do see that there's the star about expenditures for preventative efforts. And I do also see 3.1% is increased in other, and I'm wondering if that's trying to balance it out a bit, but I wondered if I could hear an explanation about why less money was going towards special education coming out of the pandemic.
Well, there are two. Kathleen Bodie, Superintendent. May I speak, Mr. Moderator?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. There are two parts of the special education budget. There is the budget for students that are attending school, the Arlington Public Schools, and then there are funds allocated for out-of-district placements. What you're seeing is a composite of the two. Actually, the amount of money that we're spending in district is increasing, but the amount of money we're spending out of district has decreased. And actually, I think that speaks well to the programming that we're doing, is that we do not have the number of students that require out-of-district placement as we may have had in past years. However, I will say that special education spending for out-of-district is very volatile. And while we may have a decrease now, we could share the screen to show you, you can see that there is a volatility to it. And so that even though we are spending less next year, I think that town meeting in future years, you may or may not see an increase. It's just hard to say. So the numbers that you have before you, that's in the budget, actually do represent what we what we need to spend next year for out-of-district placements. I don't know, Mr. Moderator, if we can share a screen, and Mr. Mason could put up that we have a graph that we could show you.
That's
all right.
It's
all right.
Not that easy.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Bodie. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Ciano?
I guess, and I did find it, but I guess this report was emailed to everybody, and I have found it. Thank Mr. Carden, and I wonder who decided not to mail it, because people that don't have email obviously didn't get the hard copy. And the next thing I want to say is congratulations, and we'll miss Dr. Bodie. I understand she's leaving pretty soon. So thank you, Mr. Moderator. I wonder why there wasn't a hard copy prior to 4/27 when it was emailed. But thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Well, if I had my way, everything would be emailed.
I hear you.
We'd save thousands and thousands of dollars in mailing and paper costs.
Gotcha.
But I don't know why, because we had a strict deadline as to when they had to get that report to us in order to get it handed out. We actually hand delivered instead of mailing this year. But we'll see what's going to happen in the future, Mr. Ciano. Mr. Cohen, thank you.
I made a mistake.
Who made a mistake? Mr. Cohen?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Ganit D7. My name is Ganit Cohen. I'm from Precinct 19. And if my question is not in scope, please let me know. I'm asking if the budget has money, does the budget have money set aside for retaining teachers? I know that some teachers may leave us, some great teachers may leave us for districts that pay more than what Arlington is paying. So my first question is, does the budget have money set aside for retaining teachers? And also, if there is something in the budget, or there is a forward-looking planning for increasing our teachers' salaries, and if this is not the place to ask this question, please let me know.
We'll allow a brief answer, but that's the kind of question that should be addressed directly to the school committee. But Mr. Mason?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Michael Mason, School Chief Financial Officer. So our budgets are developed based on the contractual obligations that we know at the time, with some flexibility in there to understand if there's additional needs. But that's typically a bargaining question, and I wouldn't go any further into discussion about it.
Okay, good. Thank you. Ms. Cohen, anything
Thank you.
further?
No, thank you.
Okay, Michelle Phelan.
Myself.
Yep.
I think I did.
We
I
can hear you.
Okay, good.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Thanks. I noticed on page 14 of the report, the 2019 to 2020 expenditures by student analysis. Arlington falls below the state average for per student spending. And, when you consider how expensive Arlington is to live in, how proud we are of our resources in our community, I'm just wondering if the superintendent or anybody representing the school department has a comment about where Arlington sits relative to the rest of the state.
Okay, we'll allow a brief answer again. That's a little bit beyond scope, but Dr. Bodie, can you give us a brief answer?
The per pupil spending in Arlington has been below the state average, I believe, for almost the entire time I've been superintendent. But that doesn't mean that we do not have a great teaching staff, and we meet the needs of our students, both students that need extra support, students who perhaps need more challenge. So it's a range. But the answer is we have been below state average for some time, but that also speaks to, I just think how conservatively we've been managing our money.
Okay. Thank you very much for the answer. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, Ms. Phelan. Anyone else wish to speak to education? Seeing none, that completes the education budget. Brings us to budget 24, Health and Human Services. Any questions there? Terrence Marshall?
And thank you again, Mr. Moderator. Terrence Marshall, Precinct 5. I see in the budget that there are 2 new positions programmed for fiscal year 22 with Health Compliance Officer. I was just wondering if the director could quickly speak to the scope or the job description of those positions, and if everyone can reference the 4 stars, which denote a COVID-related position. So I was wondering, did the director believe that those positions would be programmed future years, future budgets, past fiscal year 22, based off of the scope of those positions?
Yeah, good question. At the director?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Moderator. This is Christine Bongiorno, Director of Health and Human Services. Thank you for this question, Mr. Marshall. The 2 additional health compliance officer positions were added to the budget using some funds that came from the federal government in order to allow our department to obviously take on the bulk of the work that was needed to do during COVID. So the enforcement of the governor's orders, as well as case contact tracing and the vaccination efforts that the department undertook and will continue to do as time goes on. The decision to keep those positions in this upcoming budget is one that we felt strongly about. And in fact, over the course of the past several months, we did have one of the health compliance officers that had been with our department a number of years actually step down and leave. So there is actually now a vacant position. So we are up by one over the past years. So I think moving forward, our department had always sort of needed additional health compliance officer time. And so by adding these during COVID, it really helped us not only during COVID, but also just to sort of keep up with the work that these positions do throughout the course of the year.
Thank you.
You do see that you anticipate that the health compliance officer would be kind of an existing position to remain on staff that you could use to be flexible in the event of any particular need that might arise or present itself, emergent requirements. Is that be fair? And then would that be then programmed into future years?
Correct. Correct. I think it will be a year-to-year decision, but we will obviously continue to evaluate that as time goes on. Yes.
I thank the director and thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall. Thank you, Ms. Bongiorno. Bob Jefferson.
Bob Jefferson, Precinct 12. Mr. Moderator, I don't want to take too much time, but I would just like to acknowledge and thank the whole Health and Human Services Department. I know it's been mentioned by the manager and by the Board of Selectmen, but for someone who worked directly with them as your town's emergency management director for years, they are one of the most professional and prepared departments that I had to work with. We dealt with a lot of emergencies over the years, and they were always at the forefront of helping. We need to thank Christine Bongiorno for her direction and leading that whole department and all its divisions, and also Natasha Warden, our health director, for what they did this past year with COVID. I think if we were in town hall right now, we'd all be standing clapping for them. So I just want to thank them and acknowledge that. I know it may not be completely in the scope of the budget, but I needed to put that forward. That's all. Thank you.
And it's very much appreciated because we all have their thanks for the past year and keeping us healthy and safe in Arlington. If I could, I'd have us all raise and thank them, but I can't. Ms. Bloom?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Nancy Bloom, Precinct 18. Just a small question on the budget. There's a I assume health compliance officer / sealer, and that seems to have gone up from 0.11 to 0.26. I was wondering if someone could speak to why. Is that just because of COVID, or just it's not listed as part of COVID? So I was just wondering what it was exactly.
Ms. Bongiorno?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Christine Bongiorno, Health and Human Services Director. As you'll see in the budget, there are actually a number of positions that look like they may have gone up a bit. This was the first year that we have decided to actually show some of the alternative funding sources that make up the positions that make up the health department. So the sealer of weights and measures position is a 0.26. So he works 9 hours per week. It's 0.11 funded in the town budget, and the remaining money is actually paid for out of a separate fund. And there are a number of other positions, which you'll see they're showing a number of, I'm trying to think of some of the other grants that we have. You'll see them in the budget, but that is the decision was made to show the full positions this year, and then also the offsets, which are the grants and the other funding sources.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Moderator.
Thank you. Anything else on Health and Human Services? Seeing none, that completes Health and Human Services. It brings us to retirement. Anyone wish to speak to retirement? Mr. Jameson? Hi, Gordon.
Second. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Gordon Jamerson, Precinct 12. Took a little time for the unmute button to go up. I have a question for either the treasurer or the comptroller as they relate to the retirement budget. There was a wonderful review for the last funding, the 1.77% and from Standard & Poor's, which gives us a AAA rating. The sole area of concern was I think the investment strategy of the retirement board. Perhaps the comptroller, as an ex officio member, could provide us some comments on her thoughts on the investment strategy of the retirement board.
Is the comptroller here?
Mr. Moderator, I could address that.
Yes, Mr. Fossett.
Yeah, the town is enrolled with the state retirement system. So the entire investment profile is managed by the called PRIM at the state level, and it has been that way for a number of years.
Is it 100% that they invest all funds under their responsibility?
Is it 100%? I'd say it's 100% of the retirement of the contributory pensions. Yes.
Okay. I just was concerned about that, and so I would point the FinCom, the comptroller, the Treasury towards the comments in the Standard & Poor's comments. It was the sole, as I read it, the sole negative in our AAA rating. Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else wish to speak to retirements? Seeing none, it's completed. Insurance. Anyone want to speak to insurance? Budget 26 on page B14. Seeing none, completed. Reserve fund. Anyone want to speak to reserve funds? Seeing none, completed. This brings us to the enterprise funds. We're now on page B15. I'll read through the enterprise funds, water and sewer. Recreation enterprise fund. Okay, that's completed. Complete that. Ed Burns Arena enterprise funds. Anyone want to talk about the hockey rink? Council on Aging enterprise fund. Timor Yantar. Council on Aging. Timor?
Mr. Moderator, Timor Kaya Yantar, Precinct 9. This is a point of order. You skipped one. You skipped Recreation Enterprise Fund. B.
I said I went to water and sewer.
Oh, he did.
Water and sewer, and you skipped one.
And I said water and sewer. Had recreation enterprise funds. Nobody wanted to speak on that. If anyone wants to speak on it, now's your chance.
I heard you wrong. I'm sorry.
Yep. All right, enterprise. So back to Council on Aging. Anyone want to speak on that? And our last one is Arlington Youth Counseling Center Enterprise Fund. Anyone wish to speak about that? Okay, completed. And then all we have after that is the summary, which we're not going to go over. So we have before us the all of the budgets under Article 55 and Mr. Ellis's amendment. So first we're going to vote on Mr. Ellis's amendment. And if you recall, on the police budget, Mr. Ellis has an amendment to remove $43,000 from the police budget with funds going into the general fund. So first, town meeting members are going to vote on Mr. Ellis's amendment. So get ready to go back to your portal page. Well, we bring up the vote on the Mr. Ellis's amendment. If you're in favor of Mr. Ellis's amendment, you'll cast your vote as yes and click cast your vote. If you do not want Mr. Ellis's amendment, you would vote no and cast your vote. If you cannot use the portal, which I encourage you to try and do, use the chat feature on Zoom. Yes for the amendment, to no, type no for against the amendment. And the amendment is basically remove $43,000 from the police department budget and placing this amount into the general fund. Or you can text your votes to 617-575-9266. So first attempt to use the portal, then chat it through Zoom. And if that doesn't work, text it. And if all else fails, call it into Ms. Brazil, 781-316-3071. Okay, it looks like we have a much better response using the portal on this vote. As soon as I get a thumbs up, we'll close voting. Okay, we can close voting. And this is for Mr. Ellis's amendment. The motion fails. We have 45 in the affirmative, 176 in the negative. The motion fails. So we'll run through these screens. Okay, I'm going to close it. Now we're coming for a vote on the entire consolidated appropriation budget under Article 55, as we've spent the evening reviewing. So get ready, back on your portal page. Okay, the voting is now open. If you're in favor of the budgets as presented by the Finance Committee under Article 55 in their report, vote 1 for yes, cast your vote. If you're against the budgets, vote 2 for no. And encourage you to use the portal. If that fails, try to use the chat feature in Zoom or text 617-575-9266. We're voting on the entire budget now. 1 for yes, yes, or 2 for no, no. We've had pretty good work with the people using the chat and the portal. We still have 20 seconds left to vote, so town meeting members, go ahead and take your chance to vote right now. If you haven't voted yet, now's your last chance to do so. We're just entering in the last 1 or 2 people. Okay, we're good to go. Let's close voting. And the motion carries, or the main vote carries 213 in the affirmative, 10 in the negative. It's 95.5%. And that ends Article 55. Okay, seeing that it's 11 o'clock, I'm going to ask for any notice of reconsideration on Article 55. Mr. Fossett has filed a motion notice of reconsideration.
Mr. Moderator, yes.
Yes, sir.
I file a notice for reconsideration on Article 55, having voted in the affirmative.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to make notice of reconsideration on 55? Please use the raise hand feature on Zoom if you wish to do so. Otherwise, we'll entertain a motion for adjournment for the evening.
I move to adjourn.
Second.
Second, all in favor? Mr. Klein has a point of order. Mr. Klein, what's your point of order?
Mr. Moderator, Christian Klein, Precinct 10. I just wanted to confirm whether we would begin Wednesday with Article 56 or with the Minuteman budget.
We're going to start Wednesday with Minuteman at 8 o'clock, and then we'll go directly to Article 56. So what we'll technically do is take Minuteman off the table, have Dr. McQuillan present his budgets, and we'll entertain Minuteman budget. Then we'll go right to Capital Planning 56.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you all very much. We'll see you on Wednesday night. You just heard the plan of action. So be ready Wednesday night with any questions for Minuteman and or Capital Planning. Okay. Thank you all very much. Good job tonight. We got through the budgets.